Okay, let's have a word of prayer then and we'll get underway. Lord, thank you for the weekend. Thank you for the privilege of serving. Thank you for a beautiful day. Thank you that Hannah can join us today, and we just ask that our time together would be well spent, and we'd learn, we'd grow. And the examples that we're reading about, though imperfect, not only in terms of the person, but also in terms of the record. We know that we're talking about human historians. But we just ask that the Spirit of God would use the things that we observe to challenge and change our lives more and more into the image of the Lord Jesus. We pray in his name. Amen. All right, so let me find where we are. Get this turned on. And we'll get moving ahead here. So I think we're somewhere. Well, let's see here. There we go. Can you see that okay? Or do we need to tone down the sunlight coming in here? All right. So tell me where we left off. We talked about the student's response from Knox, the guy that sold his overcoat. Did we talk about their arrival in China in 1888, some of the hardships with illness and deaths of 5 of their 11 children, fire and flood, the Boxer Rebellion? Okay. How about this one? Unusual method of ministry. They did open house evangelism. Do you remember talking about that? Okay. Preaching 8 hours a day. That's where we left off. Yeah. I mean, this guy, yeah, that's what I say. How in the world? There are just some people that are blessed with an overdose of energy. I mean, overdose in the right sense of the term. Okay. God gives them extra energy. I spend a ton of emotional energy when I teach. I really throw myself into it. And I did Romans this morning, and then we had, our faculty staff chapel. I went over there and felt just exhausted. Here it is, just getting started in the morning. But this guy preached 8 hours a day. And he did that, I think, fairly consistently. And his wife, Rosalind, ministered to women in the backyard. And remember, this is unusual because this just wasn't something that would be culturally normal for someone of that status in a very high power distance culture to open his home to let people in. We're a low distance power distance culture here, right? In the States, we like to walk into a room where you can't tell who the CEO is because we're all sitting around together in business cash and talking, and we kind of like that. But in a country like China, where the power distance is so obvious, for somebody like him to open his home and let people in was just unthinkable. And yet it worked. People really admired that. Whoops, that was a quiz. All right, Boxer Rebellion. So what year did the Boxer Rebellion take place? Real easy to remember.
1900.
1900, right. Remember, like the Native American uprising with King Philip, they just were getting tired of Western incursion and the colonialist idea that we have to Christianize cultures in order to get them ready for the gospel. And so, but they survived that. They were able to continue their ministry after the Boxer Rebellion. They found a big meeting place. They made outreach to surrounding villages. And I really appreciate this about the Goforths. He wasn't the kind that, just kept a stranglehold on everybody. He found evangelists to take over as they moved on, nationalizing the work, letting them lead it. Rosalind was a bit hesitant to this idea because of the amount of traveling that it would involve. This means they had to move around, right? You start a work, people come to Christ, you find a national to take over, and then you move. So I don't know how many times they moved during their ministry, but ladies, am I correct in assuming that moving for a family is probably harder on the wife than it is on the husband? Or is that an unfair generalization?
I would say it's probably true.
Why would you say that?
Well, not everybody's super attached to their families, but I just feel like women are more emotional and they're more focused on relationships and things, so they usually like to be around their family more, whereas the guy is more independent and wants to start his own thing.
Mhm. Women have a nesting instinct too, right? Your home is your nest. It's not just a place to come and sleep and eat, but it's a nest. And so to get up and have to redo all that, rebuild that nest is hard. Now I'm a man, but I'm a homebody. It would be hard for me too. I'm a homebody. So what about Goforth as a family man? How did he do? Remember anything about his life as a family man? I know we're behind, and so you read this many moons ago. But remember anything about him? Well, on page 204, right in the first full paragraph, Rosalind frequently had reservations about her husband's dedication to the family. As a wife, she felt less than fully secure in her position as wife and mother. Before she and the children returned to Canada alone in 1908, she probed him concerning his commitment to her. And then she asked this question: suppose I were stricken with an incurable disease in the homeland and had but a few months to live. If we cabled you to come, would you come? Okay, now that, I mean, she's kind of fishing for his attitude toward his family here. All right. And by the way, that sort of thing happens. Okay. I want you to give me your evaluation of his response. Okay. Let me read his response. So again, you guys understand the scenario, right? She has an incurable disease and she only has a few months to live. And, we cable you to come because you're out traveling. Would you come? Here's his response. Goforth obviously didn't want to answer the question. An outright no would have been too harsh, but Rosalind persisted until he gave his answer in the form of a question to her. Suppose our country were at war with another nation, and I, a British officer in command of an important unit. Much depended on me as the commander as to whether it was to be victory or defeat. Would I, in that event, be permitted to forsake my post in response to a call from my family in the homeland, even if it were what you suggest? Could she say? She had no choice but to sadly reply, no. So tell me your evaluation of his response to the scenario that he creates to respond to her question.
I think it's unfair. Go ahead, Sharon.
Makes it sound like God needs him. But I don't think that God can't work without him. Like in his response, he says like, oh, well, my country needs me to do this. And I think that God will provide another way or another person for the people who hear the gospel, and they don't necessarily need him.
Okay. All right, good. Laura, are you starting to say something too?
Yeah, there's a few things. One thing to go off of what was Sharon was saying is like, he has that idea that like God needs him there, whereas like he'll readily set up a church and then set an evangelist there to keep it going, whereas he's in a good place to leave. Then he just keeps going. I think his like, her situation, when she made up a situation, it was a false situation that wasn't actually happening at the current moment, but she didn't make up any roles. He was still the husband and she was still the wife. And so as his job, like he's supposed to take care of his family. But then when he gave a situation, he also gave a fake situation, which was fair because she did too. But then he made up a fake position as a commanding army officer. And he wasn't that in the first place, whereas he was a husband. So I think he's like making it more than it should be, and he's wrong.
Yeah. Good. Anybody else want to comment? I think you hit the main points. He painted a picture that was very unrealistic. It's true that if somebody's a commanding officer in the situation that he described, it probably would not be possible for him to leave. But that is not a reflection of the reality that he was in as a missionary. And so I think, I'm not sure all that was going through his mind, but I do think that he was a bit unfair and unrealistic in in the portrait that he painted of his position there. So be careful, if somebody, if there is a situation with a family or colleague, be careful that you don't overstate your case and end up becoming unrealistic in the situation that you're in. I think he did that. I think he truly loved his family, but that just wasn't a fair statement. All right, there are revivals that take place in Korea and Manchuria, revival, AKA people coming to Christ, okay, in those locations. And remember that at this time, there is no North and South Korea, right? That only happened after the Korean War. And he does have an authority issue as well. And again, I think here's a case where Goforth is kind of taking advantage, an unjust advantage of a situation. The group that he's working with has certain standards by which the missionaries are expected to do their ministries. And so what happens here is that he, wanting to do his own thing and not wanting to comply with the standards of the agency, said, well, I have a higher authority that I must respond to, and that authority is the Holy Spirit. And it's easy to use God himself as an excuse not to do something. Well, I know that this is what you say we're supposed to do, but God has told me something else. Okay? And that can become a cop-out for doing what you want to do rather than doing what the Lord has, what you should do. So, when you put those two together, the way he responded to his wife, and his idea that I don't need to obey you guys because I have a higher authority than the Holy Spirit. He strikes me as a very independent man. He's going to pretty much do what he wants and justify it, So he was a good worker. A lot of good things to be said about him, but this would be an area where I would, caution you to be careful. That makes sense. He was devoted to his work to the very end. In fact, he preached 4 times on the Sunday before he died. I don't know what day he died, but so he was very, very energetic, which is probably, it's possible his wife just didn't have the same energy level that he did. So, Matthew, you and I have to think about this, when we're serving, if we have high energy levels as men, we have to be careful we don't expect our women just to keep up, we go down shopping in Karatu, Brazil when we were missionary. Park the car and you'd walk a lot, get your stuff. And I can remember more than once my wife saying, honey, you mind if I go with you? I look back, she's about 30 feet behind me. I'm walking fast on the sidewalk and she can't keep up with me. So, I had to get a little bit too hurt. All right, we got to shift gears to paradise. Yay, we're going to talk about paradise. You can probably tell by the title of this that it's not going to end up being exactly the paradise that we may think at first glance. So, what's paradise? It's the Pacific Islands, okay? And so what are some things that, people knew or thought about these island locations? We have the romantic novels of well-known authors that wrote about, the Pacific Islands and things. You've got the lay of the land. I mean, here you got beautiful oceans, ocean breeze. You got beaches. You've got rains and all kinds of fruits and no snow and ice year round. It's beautiful. And what better place to live than the influence of Captain Cook? Who was the missionary that we studied who was influenced by Captain Cook's writings?
William Carey.
Yep, it was Carey, yep. And others certainly would have been as well, but he was an explorer, right? And so he would write, and people would say, wow, it must be so cool to live in a place like that. By the way, my son, David, and his wife, Marissa, both grew up in Fortaleza, Brazil, which is around I'm sorry, they didn't. My son grew up with us. What I meant was we made frequent trips out there. And so when their idea of a vacation, beach. you go to these resorts in Mexico and places like that. He has a job that he can afford it. But that's David, not Daniel. Do you know David too, or not? I don't know if you've met David.
No, but maybe one time I had Keystone kids, the older ones,
Yeah.
and your granddaughter I like took care of.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's Harper. Yeah. And so, all this stuff. So who were the first Protestant missionaries to the Pacific Islands? Well, they came from Great Britain. And but when they got there, they discovered that the French Catholics had already arrived there. What mission group from the Catholic Church would that probably be? Who were the missionary? What was the missionary group of the Catholic Church? The order, which order? Francis Xavier was a great, most famous missionary. You guys, is the month of October wearing you guys out? Don't worry, we're not done yet. This week, we have tons of stuff going on too. So, and next week is missions conference. The Jesuits. Remember the Jesuits? Yeah. So there's a collision there, and they have to kind of, find out whose territory, who gets to work where, So they need a new kind of transportation. Well, what would that be? Pacific Islands? Don't say dune buggy. That's not it. What kind of transportation are they going to need?
Boat,
Oh, why?
because they're on islands.
Yeah, and there are thousands of islands, right? So their idea is we don't want to just stay in one place. There are thousands and thousands of islands. Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, just everywhere. So if we're going to be able to minister from island to island, we have to have boat transportation. Okay. Now, actually, that actually caused a problem at first with people back home. And the reason is because they thought this was a luxury. Oh, you want a boat? Oh, go be a missionary on the islands. You can buy a big yacht, and you get to live the good life. Now, we get it. Go to Africa, you die of malaria, right? Or you're eaten by cannibals or whatever. But yeah, go to the Pacific Islands. Who wouldn't want to be a missionary to the Pacific Islands? See? And that was the attitude of some people back home. I mean, look, if a missionary comes to your church today and says, God's calling us to Hawaii, aren't you at least tempted to say, let's ask a few questions about that call, right? I mean, just the way we tend to react. It's not fair. It's just not. So there is this need for transportation, and unfortunately, there was resistance to this for a while, and some of the missionaries got tired of waiting for responses from back home, and they built boats of their own. Some of them had engineering skills and stuff, and after a while, that whole thing kind of smoothed out. People began to realize, okay, yeah, you really do need a boat in order to travel from place to place. It's just interesting how people will react when something new like that comes up. What is the image of the native missionaries? Okay. Well, first of all, what's a native missionary?
Someone from the land.
Yeah, somebody from the island, right? Okay. Now let's just talk for a second about the culture. Do you remember reading anything about the kind of culture that they encountered when they went there? What are some characteristics of Pacific Island tribes, the culture there?
I just remember the ending, and the ending wasn't very good.
You mean about the cannibalism? Yeah. There was a lot of tribal conflict, and yeah, that did end up resulting in the death of John Williams and probably others. What about just in general the lifestyle of people in the Pacific Islands?
Kind of like significantly different, like America, like very much like we were reading about it. One of the missionaries commented he was trying to make them more like civilized.
Mm-hmm.
Not exactly.
Yeah, okay, we're in the presence of ladies here, so we'll be careful to say that, but I'm gonna, one guy said that when they told one of the tribes that they had to wear clothes, because, you know, should wear clothes, that some of the native men actually found that that created more temptation than if they hadn't worn it at all, because now they're imagining the lady having to unclothe, and it actually caused. Now, does that mean that the missionaries should say, okay, then just go naked? No. So this was an issue that they had to deal with. You know, where else would you go in the world and have to deal with that particular issue? Well, okay, there are other places in the world where maybe you'd have something like that, but this was what complicated it here was that not only was that the case, but when a visitor came to the island, especially a foreigner, the ladies would almost bend over backwards to make them feel welcome. You know what I mean? So the whole issue of immorality and moral temptation was unprecedented by any place else in missionary service. So this paradise became a huge pitfall for some guys. They just weren't prepared for it. They didn't have the orientation, and they just went under morally. Also, the native Islanders had a very, very relaxed code of ethics, a work ethic. Here come these Americans / Europeans who are always looking at their watches and keeping track of time, and and you've got these Islanders that what's a clock? What's that? The sun right there. There's your clock right there. And if we don't get it done today, we'll do it next month. And so the whole concept of time, and so they were accused of being lazy and careless and disorganized, because their concept of time was very different than that of the Europeans and Americans. And that's not just true on the islands, but it was very much true there. And this idea that we have to get something done by noon today, by what? When? See, so there was this distrust. The missionaries often felt like we can't turn this work over to these people because they can't be trusted. We have to teach them responsibility. And so, and remember that back in those days, there wasn't a whole lot of, how many people studied cultural anthropology in those days to talk about the differences in cultures, and the way they view time and leadership, and individuality and things like that. So all these things, put a real, it was a shock for people how they were going to this paradise where everything was just going to come together, right? Okay, and they also, unfortunately, they if the natives did work with them, they didn't give them very much. That isn't just true on the Pacific Islands, but it didn't really help them very much. But in spite of all that, there was relative success. There seemed to be an openness to the gospel. Even though the Catholics had been there and were promoting Catholic doctrine, they still found that there was quite a reception to the gospel there. There hadn't been as many groups on the Pacific Islands, touting their religious systems of belief. So, now I'll tell you, we lived in interior in Brazil, but it was hot. It was a dry heat. We moved out to Fortaleza on the coast. I don't even remember where I got this picture in the background, but it could have been from Brazil. That looks like a lot of beaches I've been on in Northeast Brazil. I personally struggled with the heat. The beaches are beautiful, but I really wrestled. The heat will sap your strength, and it was humid, really humid in Fortaleza. We go in the interior where we lived, and it was much drier, but the humidity on the coast was just sapped my strength. So these are some of the things we're dealing with, okay, in this kind of work. So here we go. Now, Australia and the Pacific are often grouped together. At the missions conference banquet next Thursday night, we're going to be, every table, they're all round tables with 8 people. Every one of the tables will have a little image of one of the geographic regions of the world. We're using the Joshua Project divisions to figure that out. So this will be one of them, Australia and the Pacific Islands. Okay, okay, what's this over here? Yeah, Hannah? Yeah, New Zealand, you got it, yep. Papua New Guinea up there, Indonesia to the left, and then myriads of islands. This globe just can't do it all. So, but here's at least a little bit of help. Micronesia, because they're very, very small islands. Melanesia comes from the word for dark, with the dark skin. That doesn't mean the others weren't dark skinned, it just means that's the one that got the name, Melanesia. Polynesia, obviously many islands. And anybody here ever been to that part of the world before? I haven't either. My sons, Dan and David, the one I was talking about, they went to Fiji for their honeymoon right there. Like I said, they'll take a beach over the mountains or, anything else. Cornfields of Iowa. So here we go. So you can get the relative idea. Australia here, up north, Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, and so on. All right, John Williams. Let's talk about somebody specific here. Speaking of cannibalism, right? This is the guy. All right, so who is John Williams? Well, he was sometimes known as the Apostle of the South Seas. Okay, I usually trip up students every year. I'll give you guys a heads up. Sometimes I'll say true, false. John Williams was known as the Pope of the South Seas. Not Pope, he wasn't Catholic. He was born in England, 1796. Okay, so he was saved out of a gang. Okay. Who else have we studied that came from really rough home life?
Can't remember her name.
Was it Mary?
Mary Slessor, right. Broken home, just really hard. And we're going to see others before we're done too. John Williams came from that. God used his involvement in a gang to kind of toughen him up. So he joins what's LMS?
London Mission Society.
Right, London Missionary Society at the age of 20. No formal training, that's interesting. Okay, a lot of these places would examine you, and if you didn't have, a pretty good handle on your doctrine, you wouldn't be accepted. So the fact that he had no formal training does tell us that he did study. He was pretty disciplined in his studies. He married Mary Chalmer, and it was a rather hasty marriage. And the reason for this quick marriage is because they got to catch the ship to go to an island near Tahiti. Remember, you can't get a flight any day of the week. Back in those days, trips were few and far between. So, honey, ship leaves in 3 days. You ready to get married? Yeah. What about engagement? Oh, yeah. Okay, will you marry me? Yes. Okay. We get married, and 3 days later, on board ship, and off we go. That sounds really strange to us, but it wasn't all that uncommon back then. Some people refer to these marriages more as almost business deals. We got to have this to be able to serve. And remember, the islands. Who struggled the most? Well, married men would struggle too, but if you go as a single guy to these islands, given all the temptations that are out there, you're you're doubling the temptation you're going to face. So having a wife became a very strong suggestion for anybody who was going to work among these groups. They settled on an island called Raiatea, and we'll look at that in a second here. And that became their base for 13 years of their ministry. And just mention here, that was the home of the Polynesian god Oro. How many gods were there in the Pacific Islands? Nobody can count. Innumerable. Remember this. What kind of an area would this be religiously in general? What would you call the main religious influence here?
Polytheistic.
It is polytheistic.
Is it Buddhism?
Pardon?
Is it Buddhism?
There's probably some Buddhism, but not predominantly. I mean, when you get up more into, like Papua New Guinea, yes. Very animistic. And again, some people don't consider animism a religion, but very, very animistic. And polytheism also was the order of the day. So there it is. Can you see it? Nope. but that's where it is. It's almost exactly between Australia and South America. So now here's Hawaii. I don't know if you can see that, the high there of Hawaii. Okay, so it kind of gives you at least a reference point to where it's located, South Pacific Ocean. Yeah. And we have some students and even staff administration from Guam. They served in Guam and now they've come here to Faith. And they talk a lot about the glories of Guam. And it is beautiful. I haven't been there, but I've seen pictures and talked to students. So there's the island of Raitea where they served. Okay. It's actually more than one. At least three main ones, and there's some little, and that light blue is that beautiful coral reef water that surrounds the islands where people would go snorkeling and things like that. So yeah, pretty cool place to be. So the Polynesian culture, there's a couple comments about the Polynesian culture. Little value on human life. Well, that's another thing we haven't mentioned yet, right? But it goes like if you're relaxed, easy come, easy go, and life just wasn't all that valuable. Lacks moral code and work ethic. Okay, already mentioned that as well, so we'll keep it moving here. What was his approach to the culture? Well, like most people who were missionaries from Europe and America, he sought to do what with it? What do you got to do with this pagan culture? Yeah, you got to change it. Yeah, you sought to change it. You've got to transform it into a Christian culture so that the Word of God will take root. And of course, we reject that idea now. We believe that the Word of God does its work and makes changes to people's lives and their surroundings, but not the other way around. So he was like everybody else, okay? He encouraged house construction. Where did most of them live? Well, it just depended. But when we say house construction, we're talking about European type housing, right? And I mean, we got to get people into real houses. Be careful. We've heard stories of work teams that go to a field, and they say, "Man, they're using these primitive tools." And we brought them some real tools, and they look at those real tools, and that's really cool. They set it aside and go back to using the tools that they're used to using. So sometimes what we consider advanced or upgraded or better technology may not actually be the best idea for people that aren't used to that. He did have a zeal for evangelism. They had multiple Sunday services, kind of sounds like Jonathan Goforth, right? Preaching lots and lots of times. Now, I like this about John Williams. He delegated work to the natives. Yippee! He was willing to trust them. He's paddling upstream here doing this, but he's willing to trust them. Remember John Williams? Not John Williams. John Eliot, the missionary to the Native Americans way back. Remember, he did the same thing. He was willing to delegate. So I give him an A+ for that one. And then there's that need for a ship. Okay, remember we talked about that. And he was an iron worker. Okay, he came from an iron worker's family. So he had some welding skills and things like that. Some engineering. He understood something about putting together a boat. But the London Missionary Society says, no, it's a luxury that you'll have to do without. But remember, today, if I want to communicate to the Mission Society, how long does it take for my message to get there? Well, it's basically instantaneous. You hit the send button, bam, or you can Zoom them and talk live. And in these days, communication took months. You write a letter about a boat, takes 3 months to get to the LMS. They finally deal with it. They send a response back. It takes 3 months for that response to get back. You're talking 6 months. So it got to the point where they just said, nuts to it. We're gonna build a boat anyway. And the LMS didn't like it, but they finally decided what we're gonna do about it. And they let it go. All right. However, he was willing to give up the ship that he had purchased. Okay, he didn't want to cause problems, but eventually he is going to end up with a ship. Okay, but that does speak well of him as well. At first, when there was opposition, he tried to be understanding about it. sensitive to the feelings of the London Missionary Society. So he did spend a lot of time working there on that island. Gave himself, he was there for how many years? On the island of Raiatea? Just a minute or two ago.
Oh, 13.
13,
I
yeah.
know he's like added more. I was like,
Oh,
damn,
sorry,
not
no.
good. No.
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons he's willing to give up this ship. Say, okay, I will plant myself here, okay? And his use of native missionaries was good, but there were some struggles regarding that as well. Let me just, do you happen to remember from your reading what some of the issues were with using the natives? Let me read something from 221. Evangelism of the South Seas was progressing too slowly for him. The LMS strategy simply was not getting the job done. Someone had to come to the rescue with forceful leadership, and Williams saw himself as that one. His on-site experience convinced him that he knew better than the directors how to conduct evangelism, which he probably did. They're back in London, and he's there on the field, right? So that's probably not an exaggeration. So he believed that he had to make extensive use of the native missionaries. See, the LMS is still, there's more of this, we can't trust the natives. We've got to make sure that we maintain lead. We can use them, but you can't let them lead. There's that distrust. He's living there, and he says, we have to do something different. So his plan was to commission and transport these missionaries, native missionaries, to other islands, and then periodically visit them and guide them in their ministry. He wasn't afraid to hand the baton to them and let them do their work. He'd come by and visit. It's not like he just abandoned them. And I think he was on the right track. So that's what we mean by his use of native missionaries. He was willing to trust them when the people back home said, you can't do that. And then eventually, they do come up with a boat called the Messenger of Peace, and it was a 50-ton boat. Okay, they constructed this. I don't know much about cubic displacement and things like that, but 50 tons, it was a nice sized boat. Well, he had health issues like others. Yeah, he and Mary both struggled with illnesses, just kind of moving fast through this. 7 out of 10 of their children died in infancy. Who else did we just study that lost 5 out of their 11 children to diseases? Jonathan Goforth, right? Look, same thing happens here on the islands. 7 out of 10 died in infancy. But, as we mentioned earlier, there is relative success on the field. All islands within 2,000 miles of Tahiti have been visited. I have no idea how many islands that is. That's a ton of places. And this would never happen without using the natives as missionaries in those places. Now, were they well grounded in their doctrine? Sure that, were they as good leaders as the European leaders would have been? Yeah. But here's the thing, on the field, if you decide that you're not going to use the natives there because they're not as well trained or well equipped as you are, you're going to make a huge mistake. Because how are they going to learn? And if you're always the leader, how are they ever going to come to the conclusion that they're expected to take over ministry in their own places? Indigenization is just not going to happen. So I applaud him for what he did here. And were there problems there? Sure there were, but the idea was a good one. And then he goes home on furlough. And back in those days, if you'd been a missionary to the Pacific Islands, you were a national hero. How many people did that? Nowadays, you can go anywhere you want, tell about anywhere in the world you've been, and people will just say, yeah, we had some people from our church go there. Yeah, we've had, people, international travel is no longer a wow, that's cool experience. Everybody's traveling. But in those days, oh man, he went back to England and he was celebrated as a national hero, okay? Telling stories, He was a good storyteller. Some people, used to think that if you're going to be a missionary, you have to be a good storyteller. Well, I disagree with that. It's nice if you're a good storyteller, but then he writes a book, okay, and he uses the proceeds of that book to buy a second ship. more work to do, the Camden, sorry. That was a good idea, okay? And his writings also inspired people in the future to consider missions. So he's there in England for 4 years, and then he gets this glorious send-off. This national hero, this guy with a halo over his head, is now going to go back to the field from England. Big send-off. But when he gets back to the Pacific Islands, things aren't the same as they were 4 years ago. Okay? Do you remember anything about what he discovered when he went back there? Been away for 4 years now.
Didn't the people go back to like their old way of living?
There was a lot of what we sometimes call backsliding, lack of a different word. Yeah. And see, when that happens, guess what the LMS is going to say? You see, we told you you shouldn't be putting nationals in places of leadership. See what happens? Okay. So, are they right? No. There may be other explanations for that. Number one, being gone for 4 years is an awful long time to entrust to fairly new believers that kind of responsibility. It's not that they were nationals. Maybe they just weren't quite prepared yet. And maybe there were others that he left behind there when he went on furlough that just really weren't paying attention to them, helping them. The Apostle Paul would go back on his second and third journeys and revisit people that he had established in the faith before. So the problem wasn't that he had trusted work to nationals. The problem is that they probably didn't get enough mentoring to really help establish them in the work. So some of them had slipped back into whatever they had come out of. And there were conflicts going on. The Wesleyans, who would be like the Methodists, one segment of the Methodist Church, the Catholics were fighting among themselves. And anytime you get Christians fighting with each other, what does that tell the nationals? This is Christianity. Look, watch these guys fight with each other. Not a good thing. So what does he do? Well, he tries to resolve the problem among the mission. He tries to kind of be, he's this national hero. Just came back, man, this guy can do no wrong. He is a success story. So he decides, I'm gonna correct this problem. But it became obvious that he was more of a salesman than a repairman. What does that mean? What does she mean by that? It turns out that he's more of a salesman than a repairman.
He's better at talking about the need rather than fixing it.
Yeah, he really wasn't that good at negotiating solutions to problems or managing these issues. He's a really good talker, and I'm not against salesmen. Okay, I know a lot of really good salesmen, but he was better at trying to advertise, missionary work than dealing with the mechanics problems and things like that that are going on. Yeah. The islanders were turning away from Christianity, disillusioned and tired of the constant demands of the missionaries. The missionaries were very demanding of them, and they were getting tired of it. Okay, so he really didn't get very far in helping to resolve some of the leadership issues going on. And he really had ants in his pants. He wanted to go and visit other places. His wife, it's interesting, isn't it? Go forth. What do you want to do? Keep moving around. His wife says, honey, this, it's hard. This is same thing with this guy. His wife has that nesting instinct, wants to be settled in. He wants to be going all over the place. And so he goes. And he goes off to a place called the New Hebrides. And I don't. It's a group of islands that he wants to visit. And what happens there is a little bit mysterious. Sorry. Okay, what is it, when they're approaching the island there, what do they notice that should have been a red flag for them? They're coming in, they're in this big boat and they're approaching the shore and they see something that should have warned them. Right. Normally, if they were welcoming the visitors, you would have a family, all the families coming out, mom and dad and all the kids. But when they approached this island, this shore, it was all men, which tells you these guys are ready for war. Sorry, Matthew.
Very good.
These guys are there to defend their island. Okay? Now remember, not all tribes are the same, and not all islands are the same, right? There are tribes that are very, just like in the United States. Remember when we talked about Marcus Whitman and Henry Spalding, the two guys that went, Marcus Whitman goes to a place out in the Northwest where the tribe they're ministering is very violent. They're known for being aggressive. Whereas Henry Spalding is ministering in another location in the Northwest with a very friendly group of Native Americans. And so for whatever reason, these guys are not so welcoming. And sometimes these tribes would do this not because they hated the white man, but because they were afraid that incursions on their island would destroy their own culture. I may have told you that in Brazil, up in the Amazon area, the federal government actually made some laws prohibiting the changing of culture in among the natives in the Amazon region. Because some of the missionaries, they were trying to make drastic changes in their culture. And so laws were actually passed in Brazil prohibiting that. So these guys, I'm guessing that the reason for this is because they feared losing their own identity as a tribe. And remember, that includes the gods they serve and the ancestors and all of that. You're going to make them all mad by allowing these visitors to come. So nothing personal. It probably has nothing to do with them as people or their message. They might not even know what their message is. They're just feeling threatened by their presence. So what do? They go there anyway, and they're in a big boat. They take a little boat and go to shore, and bam, I'm home. Yeah, this is just 1 minute. And right away, they start spearing them. And Williams tries to swim back to the boat, but he's speared, and that's the end of his life. Later on, they do deliver his body back to him. They don't eat him as a way of showing. Is that right? Did I get that wrong?
The bones they send back.
Yeah.
Was the bones? Sorry, they did eat him. Sorry, I got the wrong story there mixed in there. I beg your pardon. So now she concludes by asking us a question like, is it possible that maybe he became so enamored with his own invincibility and his own that he simply became careless in his approach? We don't know, and I would not want to insist on that. But somebody as seasoned as he was in the work there, you have to ask the question, why? And I don't know if we'll ever know the answer to that for sure this side of heaven. All right, we got to stop there. Time to go. Hannah, thanks for joining us in class. Enjoy your stay.
Thank you.
Keep an eye on her. Make sure she's. Get that sheet from you, Matthew. There you go.
Mr. Lonsborough,
Yeah.
how come there's only one workshop time per day? Didn't there used to be workshops at like different hours? Are they now longer?
Yes, they used to be. And there used to be 2 every day.
Yeah,
But you still only signed up for 1.
right. But you
So,
could have signed up for 2.
yeah, it's because of the way that the clock is this time. Because there were some that had to go late to workshops and they're rushing to get to work or to corral or something like that. So we felt it was better to bring them back earlier in the morning.
Okay.
We were able to squeeze them all in. Just like 3 workshops now instead of 4. You used to sign up for 4, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Because there's classes on Tuesday now, it's just 3.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just kind of a combination of things. Yep. Unfortunately,
There's no front line this time, but they have the evangelical missions to the unreached,
yeah,
so
yeah.
that'll be good.
Yep. Some weren't able to come to this or that.